Shabbat Shalom. In this week's reading, Beshalach, we read some very, very unbelievable miracles that God does for the children of Israel. If you remember last week, we were talking about the phylacteries. It was the very, very end of the reading last week in the weekly reading of Bo, go to Pharaoh. As soon as we were commanded to put on the phylacteries, this was a sign from God to the people of Israel. In Hebrew, ot, O-T, means a sign. And as you know, God is constantly giving signs so that people will believe in him. If you remember Moses at the burning bush, God told him to throw the rod down to the ground and it became a serpent. And then God said, pick up the serpent and it became a rod. Or put your hand to your chest. And then when he took his hand away, it was with leprosy. And then put it back to your chest and it was okay. These are signs that God does. They're miracles, but they're signs. And then God says to Moses, go to Pharaoh and show him these signs. Go to the elders of Israel and show them these signs. And at the end of last week's reading, go to the people of Israel and tell them to put on phylacteries, the head phylactery and the arm phylactery. These are all signs from God to follow him. But in this week's reading, we see something much more than signs. We see miracles, unbelievable miracles. And what we see, of course, is the flight, the exodus beginning of the children of Israel. The second book of the Torah is called Exodus, but the actual Exodus starts with this week's reading, where the Israelites, according to the numbers given in the Torah, were 600,000 males. So if we're talking about 600,000 males, then what about 600,000 females? So, you know, we're talking about over 1.2 million people. And then there were a lot of other non-Israelite slaves that fled with us from Egypt, from slavery, into the freedom of the desert. And so we see here the Israelites moving to escape Egypt. At first they were thinking of going through Gaza, what is today Gaza, the northern Sinai coast. But because actually at that time the Philistines were there, and God was afraid, Moses and Aaron were afraid that the Israelites would not be up to the task of fighting these fierce Philistines. And so God directed Moses to lead the children of Israel through another route which would take them away from the Egyptians and away from the Philistines. I have a number of very dear friends in the United States, Jim and Penny Caldwell. They lived in Saudi Arabia for many, many years. And they and a few other friends of theirs have become committed to the idea that the Exodus did not take place through the northern part of Sinai Peninsula, but more through the mountainous central part of Sinai, where the Israelites followed a certain valley, a certain route, which became very, very narrow, heading south, and then it wound to the east, emptying out where you have today an area called Nuweiba, in Hebrew, Neviot. So Nuweiba is an area that could actually hold more than 1 million people, and what we believe, the Caldwells and myself and others, is that this mountainous secret route, which Moses probably knew very well. Don't forget, Moses was a general. Moses fought in Africa. We spoke about this. It's in my book, Return to Mecca. And so Moses leads the children of Israel through this very, very difficult, torturous path through the mountains of Sinai. And this emptied out on the eastern coast, middle of the eastern coast of Sinai. And what we see is that all of a sudden they were trapped. They were blocked by the mountains to their back and by the ocean, you know, the Red Sea directly in front of them to the east. And Pharaoh pursued them. We have to remember the Israelites could not have gone through the northern part of Sinai because the Philistines were up to the north and the Egyptian military garrisons were more to the south. And the only way that the Israelites could escape from the Egyptians would be to take the most dangerous path directly south. Like I said before, going through these mountain passes and then down, emptying out into the Neviot area. The miracle is the parting of the waters. And what we see here indeed is that the children of Israel are with their backs to the mountains, their backs to the Egyptians, and they're standing there waiting for they didn't know that the waters are going to open up. This was one of the greatest miracles in human history. And there are scientific explanations how this could have happened. And there is indeed a land bridge where the waters become shallow between Sinai and what is today Saudi Arabia. And evidently this is where they crossed. And there are, of course, people who claim that the chariots of Pharaoh are there on the ocean floor there, or the sea floor, between Neviot and Saudi Arabia. The wheels of the chariots, supposedly these things have been found. I did not skin dive there, so I myself have not seen it, but there are movies, there are books, there are proofs, purportedly, that this is indeed where Pharaoh's chariots sunk. 600 of his charioteers died. I remember once, even in the History Channel, they spoke about a special grave that Pharaoh created, where all the graves are, the pharaonic graves, where all his children were buried there, and because they were the commanders of his charioteers, and the firstborn, they were all buried together. Remember the firstborn of Pharaoh's house, he had firstborn from different wives, so a number of them died, and the commanders of his charioteers, his chariots, they died too. And so these bodies were brought back to Egypt for burial. This is a miracle. This is a miracle that more than 1 million people saw and experienced crossing that Red Sea. King Solomon built pillars on the Nuweiba side and on the Saudi side. These pillars have been removed and thrown into the sea by the Saudis and the Egyptians. But during the time of Solomon, everyone knew that that's where the crossing was. From Sinai, from Egypt, into what is today Saudi Arabia. So that is one miracle, the crossing of the Red Sea. As soon as they got over to the desert on the Saudi side, then guess what? There's no water, so the people were thirsty. And they cried out to Moses, and even Moses says to God, they're going to stone me, that they would have preferred to die in Egypt as slaves than die of thirst in the desert. And so what does God do? God provides for them water. Then they were hungry, and so God provides for them manna from heaven. In Hebrew, man is manna, meaning daily portions of God's divine food supply. Man is supposed to be like a cookie or like a waffle with the taste of honey. And this is what the Israelites ate for 40 years in the desert. So we have a number of miracles, one right after the other. And a very important point, and this is at the end of the reading, is the battle with Amalek. Now, you have a tremendous army of over 1 million people, Israelites and others who joined us, marching through the desert. And what we see here is we see this nasty tribe of Amalek. Anybody who was infirm or was walking too slowly and couldn't keep up with the major group of people, they were butchered by the people of Amalek. And there was this great battle. And you have to remember, Amalek actually is descended from Esau. In other words, descended from Isaac and Rebekah, full brother of Jacob. And they're the hatred. We spoke about the hatred between brothers and sisters during the portions that we read in Genesis. And there's a very important battle between Amalek and the Israelites under Moses. And God says to Moses, raise your arms up into the air, and if your arms are up in the air, Israel will prevail. But if your arms go down, Amalek will prevail. So Aaron and Hur came, and they seated him down on this big boulder, And Aaron and Hur held his arms up until the sun went down, so that the battle would be a victory for Israel. And I think one of the things we must learn from this is that when you're fighting the enemy, you must never be complacent. And you have to raise your arms up into the heavens and look at God for salvation. And God will bring the salvation. The moment you become lax and complacent, you lose the battle. This is a very important lesson. And what I want to share now is the Haftorah reading, which is from Judges, about the prophetess Deborah. And there's a very interesting story there about a battle in which the Israeli general Barak was fighting against the enemy general Sisera, and Barak won the battle, and Sisera took off, left his chariot and went running away from the battle scene. And he reached the tent of a lady by the name of Yael. Yael, in American English, many times in the church they call her Jael, but her name is Yael, and she was not a Jewish woman. She was from the Kenites. And some people say that she was actually descended from Jethro. If she's descended from Jethro, then she's actually part of the Druze people who live in the north of Israel. And this battle happened in the north of Israel. And so Sisera comes to her tent, and she knows exactly who this guy is, that he's an enemy of Israel. And she is an ally of Israel. And so she brings him into her tent, gives him to drink milk, and he rapidly falls asleep. He's so tired from the battle. And then she drives a tent peg through his head and kills him. And then when the Israelite forces come by, she calls them, says, "Here's the guy you're looking for. I killed him for you." And one of the things we see in both the Torah reading as well in the reading from the prophets is a poetry, a song. The first song is about the crossing of the Red Sea, and the second song talks about the battle with Sisera, praising Yael, because Yael was not even Jewish, and she was an ally of the Jewish people, just as the Christians today. Many Christians are allies of the Jews and of Israel. And one of the things that's kind of painful is that Deborah, the prophetess Deborah, curses the Jewish people of Meroz, saying, "Cursed be the people of Meroz who did not join the battle, did not join the fight. And blessed is Yael of all women who came to the aid of Israel and stood with Israel." And this indeed is an inspiration for many, many Christians and other people to stand with Israel as opposed to the enemies who would wish to wipe Israel out, which is Amalek. And the end of the reading of the Torah of this week is that Israel must wipe out Amalek, or it will be wiped out by Amalek. So it is the forces of good versus the forces of evil. And I think that it's always such a blessing every week to read the Torah, to read the prophets, and to understand just how these writings from over 3,500 years ago are so in effect today and so truthful today. And Shabbat Shalom to everyone.